Hello children. Today we will discuss Chapter 1 Political Science. What is democracy? Why democracy? We have already discussed the first part in the previous class where we learned about the different features of democracy. Today we will move on to learn about the merits and the demerits of democracy and how democracy has assumed a broader meaning. But before we go on to that, let us revise what we have already learnt in the previous class. In the previous class, we discussed about Pakistan, China, Mexico, Zimbabwe, Saudi Arabia, and through these examples, we deduced the various features of a democracy. When we studied about Pakistan, we learnt that in Pakistan, though elections were being held, it still cannot be termed as a true democracy because the people who were elected in reality had no power. All power was exercised by the military dictator and the Security Council. Whereas in a true democracy, the power must rest with the people who have been elected. We discussed about China, which has a single party system. This single party chooses the candidates who contest for elections. So, they do not offer any real choice to the people, which is against democracy. A democracy should be providing options to the people so that they can choose their representatives. In Mexico, although elections are held regularly, even though there are opposition parties, it is the PRI which comes back to power every year. So, how is it that the PRI manages to win elections? The PRI uses unfair means. The government officials pressurize the people to vote for the PRI. Even in the government schools, the teachers force the parents to vote for the PRI. In the last minute, the polling booths are shifted, making it inconvenient for the public to vote. So, the PRI wins elections every year. That means it does not give a chance to any other party to come to power. But in a democracy, elections must be free and fair. Just holding elections is not enough. In elections, those who are in power should have a fair chance of losing and giving the opportunity to another party to come to power. We also discussed about the principle of universal adult franchise. We discussed that though this is mandatory for all democracies, there are still many countries in the world where the citizens do not enjoy equal voting rights. In Saudi Arabia, until 2015, women did not enjoy the right to vote. In Estonia, the Russian minority find it extremely difficult to cast their votes. And in Fiji, the value of the vote of an indigenous Fiji is more than that of an Indian Fiji. But in a democracy, each adult citizen must have one vote and each vote must have one value. This is what we mean by universal adult franchise and political equality. Then we discussed about Zimbabwe, where the ZANU-PF party has been in power. Its leader, Robert Mugabe, had led the country in the freedom struggle and held on to power. He amended the constitution to make himself more powerful and less accountable. In Zimbabwe, though opposition parties existed, they never came to power. They never got the freedom to carry on with their political activities. People did not have the freedom of speech and expression. They could not criticize the government. The media was controlled by the government, and even the judiciary was not independent. So, the president ruled according to his own wishes, which is against the very principle of democracy. A democratic government rules within the limits that has been set by the constitution and must respect the rights of the citizens. So, we discussed about all the four important features of democracy. Democracy is not just people electing their representatives, but the rulers elected should be empowered to take all major decisions. Elections should offer a free and fair choice to the people to change their current rulers. This choice and opportunity should be available to all citizens on an equal basis, and the exercise of this choice must lead to the establishment of a government which is limited by the rules of the constitution and citizens' rights. These are the four important features that we deduced by learning from the examples of various countries. Now, the question is democracy the ideal form of government? Is it better than all other forms of government? Or are there any flaws, any demerits or shortcomings of democracy? This is what we are going to study today. So, as we move on to discuss about the arguments against democracy, we are also going to come back to learn about what are the merits of democracy and why it is the most preferred form of government. So let us first discuss about the arguments against democracy. As we know, in a democracy, elections keep happening in regular intervals. So the party in power today, the leaders in power today may be changed in the next term. So leaders keep changing, and this leads to instability. Sometimes it is difficult to implement long-term policies because of the change in leadership. Then we come to the competition between political parties and leaders. So democracy is all about coming to power. And here we see that the main intention of the parties and the leaders is to contest elections, to hold power, and to run the government. And very often these leaders and parties sacrifice the national interest for the purpose of their own. So there is no scope for morality. The leaders want to come to power at any cost. In a decision making in a democracy, there are many people involved. No single person can take a decision. This is what happens in a military dictatorship or a monarchy where one person can take any decision. But in a democracy, when any decision is taken, there are meetings, there are consultations, debates, and extensive discussions. Many people are involved. So, the possibility of making a rash decision is minimized. But in the process, there is a lot of delay that takes place. Sometimes big decisions do not work out because of this delay. In a democracy, sometimes the people who come to power ignore the interests of the public. They rule according to their own whims, and these leaders do not take up those issues that pertain to the people. As we've already discussed that democracy is based on electoral competition, it leads to corruption. There is a use of money, muscle power, and very often we also see people who are rich, people who are with a criminal background coming to power. So, since it is a competition, people take up different means to come to power. In a democracy, as we know, since everybody enjoys the right to vote, sometimes ordinary people are not aware of their rights. They really do not know what kind of changes they are looking for. So, they end up giving their votes to the wrong person. Their choice may not be the best one. So, there is one thing about democracy as it is applicable for other forms of government as well, that it does not provide a magical solution to all the problems that a country faces. In fact, there is no government who can say that we have a foolproof solution to all the problems of a country. In many countries, that is, many democratic countries of the world, poverty, unemployment, and various other economic issues still exist. If democracy would be the solution for all this, then nowhere in the world these problems would persist. But at the same time, we see that democracy ensures that people take their own decisions, but they are responsible for their own decisions. It does not guarantee that the decisions they take will be the best ones. As a number of people are involved in decision making, there is a delay in taking decisions. Frequent changes in leadership causes a setback because important decisions are delayed, and this affects the government's efficiency as well. So, democracy may not be the ideal form of government, but compared to monarchy and dictatorship, we can say that democracy is the most preferred form of government. Then we move on to arguments in favor of democracy, or what are those things about democracy which make it more preferable than the other alternatives. To learn about this, we will go back to a small incident in China. In 1958, there was a famine that occurred in China, acute food shortage, and this was the worst ever recorded in world history. China, as we already know by now, is a single party system, and if China had a multi-party system, there would have been an opposition and a free press. The response to this famine would have been quick, and this would have averted the death of a large number of people. At that time, even India was not a very economically developed country. India and China were almost at par, but it is said that a famine of this magnitude would never have taken place in India then, because we have a multi-party system, and if the government is not quick to take action to respond to the situation, it will be brought to the public eye, and it will be difficult for the government to remain in power or come back to power. So, from this example, we understand that in a true democracy, the government is more accountable and responsive to the needs of the people, because the survival of the government depends on the citizens. If the government is able to prove itself to the citizens will vote it back to power. But if it has not proved itself, then there are chances that the government loses in the next elections. Therefore, being responsive to the needs of the people and being accountable to the people is one of the major advantages that democracy enjoys over the others. Democracy and decision making. As we already know that no one can take a unilateral decision in a democracy. Democracy involves people. We have elected people who are our representatives who take decisions on behalf of us. So, when any important decision is being taken, there are many people involved. The views of many people are taken into consideration, debates, discussions, and this minimizes the chances of taking a bad decision. So, the quality of decision making is much better in a democracy compared to a dictatorship where one man takes all the decisions for the entire country without the consent of the people. Democracy and peaceful coexistence. We are all aware that India is a country where we have unity in diversity. We have people of different religions, languages, culture, regions, traditions, and this makes it very simple that even their choices are varied. So, differences of opinions and interests do happen, and sometimes those of one group clash with those of another. So, usually the more powerful group starts dictating terms and others are forced to accept. But in a democracy, no one is a permanent loser or a permanent winner today. The person in power today has a chance of not being in power tomorrow. So, a democracy provides various ways of resolving conflict between the different people, not by the use of brutal power, but through constitutional procedures and different steps that are taken to resolve the issues. So, democracy provides a method to deal with differences and conflicts among the various social groups that are there in the country. Democracy and dignity of citizens. We are all aware that we enjoy certain rights in a democracy, and those rights are given to us by the Constitution. Those rights are placed above the government, except for certain cases. Those rights are inalienable. Nobody can take away those rights from us. Democracy is based on the principle of political equality, because in a country like ours, the poorest and the illiterate have the same status as the rich and the educated. So, we the people are not the subjects of a ruler, but we are the rulers ourselves. We are responsible for our own conduct. We are also responsible for our own choices. So, this is how democracy enhances the dignity of citizens by giving them equal rights, and that is why we say that in a democracy, people are the source of all power and all people are equal. Coming to all this, we now know that democracy also cannot guarantee that mistakes cannot be made. But the difference is, in a democracy, these mistakes come to the public eye. And so, the rulers who have made a mistake in their decision can change their decisions, or else the power is with the people to change the rulers themselves in the next elections by voting them out of power. So, in a democracy, there is space for public discussion and there is room for correction. So, in a democracy, even if mistakes are made, its remedy is also possible. So, it is better than other forms of government because it allows us to correct its own mistakes. So, coming to this, to sum up, democracy is better than other alternatives because it offers the citizens better decisions. It respects the wishes of the people. It allows different kinds of people to live together in harmony with each other. It offers more dignity to all citizens and it allows a way of correcting its own mistakes. So these are the reasons which makes democracy the most preferred form of government. Let us go back a little and remember what democracy was when it initially started and how it changed. In the beginning, democracy was direct democracy. That is, people voted directly and were directly involved in decision making, like the Gram Sabha of a village. As time passed, direct democracy was replaced by representative democracy. What is this representative democracy and why did it become important? Representative democracy means choosing our representatives who take decisions on behalf of us. In the world of today, nations have huge populations and it is not possible for every citizen to physically be present and participate to take a collective decision because there could be many citizens who may not have the interest, may not have the time or the skill to participate in different kinds of decisions that are taken for the country. So, representative democracy is the democracy of the day. Coming to this, we now know that democracy is not just a form of government. It can be used to describe a value as well. It has a broader meaning. We can apply democratic principles to the method of taking decisions, whether it is in a family, an organization, or even your own classroom. So, it is a principle that can be applied to every sphere of life. In a democracy, the people, the citizens have the most important role to play because they hold all the power. They can make a difference. Whether a country is less democratic or more democratic will depend on what we do as citizens. How strong or how weak we make our democracy is in our hands. So, the active participation of all the citizens makes the democracy successful in a country. To sum up, the arguments in favor of democracy are that it is more accountable to the people and more responsive to the needs of the people. It offers better decision making. It respects the wishes of the people. It allows different kinds of people to coexist in harmony. It offers dignity to citizens and it allows a way of correcting its own mistakes. So, having done a short recap already of what we have discussed, let us answer some questions. In a democracy, the government cannot misuse power. Why is it so? Because the government's power is checked by the constitution. It cannot rule in any way that it wishes to. All democracies bring about economic growth. Is this statement true? This statement is not true because if that would have been the case, the democratic countries of the world would have eradicated poverty and unemployment long since. Complete the sentence. Democracy enhances the dignity of citizens as it is based on the principle of political equality. Which of these is not a good argument in favor of democracy? People feel free and equal in a democracy. Conflicts are resolved in a better way. Democracies are more prosperous than others. And the last option, democratic government is more accountable to the people. The answer here is option C. Democracies are more prosperous than others. As we have already discussed that if democracies are more prosperous than others, then most of the world countries would have done away with poverty and unemployment. But it is not so. What does the strength of a democracy depend upon? It depends upon active political participation by all the citizens. We have come to the end of the chapter. I hope you have now a clear idea about the arguments in favor of democracy and the arguments against democracy and how the concept of democracy is changing. These 3 questions have to be completed as home assignment. Question number 1. Discuss 3 arguments against democracy. Question number 2. Democracy is better than other forms of government. Justify this statement. Question number 3. Define representative democracy. Why has it become necessary in today's context? That is all for today. Thank you.